Welcome back to Law to Dream. Tonight, we're riding into one of the most poignant and beautifully crafted worlds in gaming history. A world where the sun sets not just on the day, but on an entire way of life. A world where progress and civilization march forward like an unstoppable train, crushing everything that came before it. We're traveling to the American frontier in 1911, to the final days of the Wild West, to a time when outlaws became relics and legends became ghosts. This is the world of Red Dead Redemption, a story about the inevitable march of time, about the impossibility of redemption, and about what it means to watch your entire world disappear around you. Over the next hour, we'll explore the complete story of John Marston, a man caught between two worlds. We'll ride through the dusty towns of New Austin, cross the border into the chaos of revolutionary Mexico, and climb into the mountains of West Elizabeth. We'll meet memorable characters, experience the brutal reality of frontier justice, and witness the painful transformation of America from wild frontier to modern nation. By the time we're finished, you'll understand why Red Dead Redemption isn't just a game about cowboys and shootouts. It's a meditation on change, mortality, and the American dream itself. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin our journey into the dying days of the Old West, the world of 1911. To understand Red Dead Redemption, we need to understand the very specific moment in history it captures. The year 1911 sits at a fascinating crossroads in American history. It's been 41 years since the end of the Civil War. The Transcontinental Railroad has been complete for 4 decades. Electricity is spreading across the nation. Automobiles are becoming more common. The telephone is no longer a novelty, but a practical tool. The first airplanes have taken flight. Modern medicine is advancing rapidly. In just 3 years, World War I will begin, dragging America onto the global stage in ways that will change the nation forever. But in the remote corners of the American West, in places like New Austin and West Elizabeth, these changes are arriving slowly, reluctantly, like uninvited guests at a wake. The frontier that once defined American identity is closing. The vast open spaces are being carved up, fenced in, civilized. Towns that were once lawless havens for outlaws are installing streetlights, paving roads, building banks and schools. The federal government, once distant and largely irrelevant to life on the frontier, is asserting its authority with increasing aggression. Law enforcement is becoming organized, professional, relentless. The Bureau of Investigation, the predecessor to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, has been established just 3 years earlier, in 1908. These agents represent a new kind of law enforcement, one that doesn't stop at county lines or state borders. They have resources, technology, and most importantly, the full backing of the federal government. The transformation isn't just institutional, it's cultural, philosophical, existential. The values that sustain the frontier, self-reliance, independence, the freedom to live outside society's rules, are being replaced by new values: order, progress, conformity, integration into the broader American society. The romanticized figure of the cowboy, the lone gunslinger living by his own code, is becoming an anachronism. There's no place for these men in the new America being built. They're being hunted down, imprisoned, or killed. Those who survive must either adapt or die. An adaptation, for men who've spent their lives outside the law, is often a slow form of death itself. This is the world John Marston inhabits. A world that no longer wants him, no longer needs him, but isn't quite finished with him yet. The government will use him for one final task, extracting the last bit of usefulness from him before discarding him like a worn-out tool, because that's what he represents to them. Not a human being with hopes and dreams and family, but a relic of a violent past that must be buried so the future can proceed unobstructed. The man called John Marston. John Marston is 38 years old when his story begins. He's lived a hard life, and it shows in every scar on his face, every line around his eyes, every cautious movement of a man who survived countless gunfights. Born around 1873, John had a brutal childhood. His father was a man consumed by drink and violence. His mother died when John was young. By the time he was just a child, John was already fending for himself on the streets, stealing to survive, learning that the world was a harsh place with no mercy for the weak or unlucky. At some point during his youth, John tried to rob a man on the road. That man was Dutch van der Linde. Instead of killing the young thief or turning him over to the law, Dutch did something unexpected. He took John in. He fed him, clothed him, taught him to read and write. Dutch gave John something he'd never had before, a family. Dutch's gang wasn't just a criminal organization. It was a community, a chosen family of outcasts and misfits who'd found each other in a world that had rejected them all. Dutch preached a philosophy of freedom, of living outside society's constraints, of taking from the rich and corrupt to survive. He was charismatic, intelligent, well-read. He could quote philosophers and poets. He made robbery and murder sound like acts of rebellion against an unjust system. For years, John rode with Dutch's gang. He participated in robberies, murders, kidnappings. He became Dutch's protege, one of his most trusted men, alongside Arthur Morgan, Bill Williamson, and Xavier Escuela. They robbed banks and trains. They killed lawmen and rival outlaws. They lived fast and violent lives, always one step ahead of the law, always moving, never settling. It was thrilling and terrible, exhilarating and exhausting. But it was the only life John knew, and Dutch was the only father figure he'd ever had. Then things began to change. Dutch became more erratic, more violent, more paranoid. The jobs got sloppier. People died who didn't need to die. The law closed in tighter. The gang started to fracture. John met Abigail, a woman working in the gang's orbit. They had a son together, Jack. Suddenly, John had something more important than the gang, more important than loyalty to Dutch. He had a family of his own to protect. He began to see Dutch differently, not as a philosopher outlaw, but as a dangerous, deluded man leading them all to destruction. Around 1906, during a botched robbery, John was shot and left for dead by his former brothers. Bill Williamson made sure the job was done, or at least thought he did. But John survived. He was found by Abigail, nursed back to health, and given a second chance at life. For the next few years, John tried to go straight. He bought a small ranch at Beecher's Hope in West Elizabeth with money he'd saved and what Abigail had managed to put aside. He worked the land. He raised cattle. He tried to be a father to Jack, a husband to Abigail. He tried to leave his past behind, to become a new man. But the past doesn't let go so easily. In 1911, federal agents Edgar Ross and Archer Fordham arrive at his ranch with an army at their backs. They take Abigail and Jack hostage. The message is simple and brutal. John will hunt down the surviving members of his old gang and bring them to justice, dead or alive, or his family will pay the price. John has no choice. The government owns him now. He's forced to become the very thing he spent years trying to escape. A killer, a hunter of men, an instrument of violence. The only difference is that now he's doing it with the government's blessing, which somehow makes it worse, more shameful, more final. This is who John Marston is when we meet him, a man trying desperately to protect his family, knowing that in doing so, he's betraying everything he once believed in and everyone he once loved. He's a man caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, too violent and scarred for the civilized life he's tried to build, too changed and weary for the outlaw life he left behind. He's a walking contradiction, and that contradiction will ultimately destroy him. New Austin and the first target. John's journey begins in New Austin, the southwestern territory of the frontier. New Austin is a harsh land of red rock deserts, scrubby vegetation, and relentless sun. It's divided into 4 regions. Cholla Springs in the east, a relatively hospitable area with ranches and the town of Armadillo serving as its hub. Hennigan's Stead to the northeast, another ranching area. Gaptooth Ridge in the northwest, a rugged, mountainous region dotted with abandoned mines and hideouts. And Rio Bravo to the south, the most desolate and dangerous area, where the land becomes increasingly barren as it approaches the Mexican border. The territory represents the American Southwest, places like Arizona, New Mexico, and western Texas. It's a land that's always been hard to tame, and in 1911, it's still hanging on to its wild nature, even as civilization tries to force its way in. Armadillo, the main settlement in New Austin, shows the awkward transition happening across the frontier. It has a sheriff's office, a general store, a saloon, a doctor's office, but it also has regular gunfights in the streets, corrupt lawmen, and a constant threat of outlaw violence. It's a town caught between its lawless past and its aspirations for respectability. John arrives in New Austin with a single goal: find Bill Williamson and bring him to justice. Bill has established himself at Fort Mercer, an abandoned military installation in Cholla Springs that he's turned into a stronghold for his gang. John rides up to the fort alone, hoping perhaps that he can reason with his former friend, convince him to surrender. It's a naive hope, and it goes exactly as badly as you might expect. Bill mocks John's attempt at civility, reminds him that John was left for dead by the gang, and then shoots him, leaving him wounded and bleeding in the dirt. John barely survives. He's found by Bonnie McFarlane, daughter of a local rancher. who takes him back to her family's ranch and nurses him back to health. The McFarland Ranch becomes John's base of operations for his time in New Austin. It's a working cattle ranch, one of the last remnants of the old frontier way of life. Bonnie's father, Drew McFarland, is an aging rancher trying to keep his operation afloat in an increasingly difficult economic environment. Bonnie herself is strong, intelligent, independent. She runs much of the ranch's operations, handles the business side of things, and isn't afraid to get her hands dirty with hard work. She and John develop a mutual respect and perhaps something more, though John never acts on it. He's devoted to Abigail, even if he doesn't always show it well. While recovering, John helps out around the ranch, herding cattle, breaking horses, handling ranch business. These sequences are deliberate in their pacing. They show John as a man capable of honest work, capable of existing in civilized society. They're a glimpse of the life he wants, the life he's trying to build. But they're also tinged with melancholy because we know, and John knows, that this isn't why he's here. This peaceful interlude is temporary. Soon, he'll have to return to violence. To assault Fort Mercer and bring down Bill, John needs help. He can't do it alone. So he begins making alliances with the local criminals and outcasts, the only people willing to help with something as dangerous and illegal as attacking a fortified gang hideout. He meets Marshall Lee Johnson, the local lawman who's pragmatic enough to work with a former outlaw if it means cleaning up his territory. He encounters Nigel West Dickens, a con artist and snake oil salesman who's all talk and flamboyance, but surprisingly useful when it comes to schemes and plans. There's Seth Briers, a grave robber and treasure hunter who's half mad but knows the territory better than anyone. An Irish, an alcoholic arms smuggler whose real name is never revealed, who can provide weapons for the assault. Each of these men represents a different aspect of frontier life. Marshall Johnson is the old-style lawman, more interested in practical justice than legal procedure, willing to bend the rules to get results. West Dickens is the con man, the trickster figure who's always been part of the American frontier mythology, moving from town to town, selling false hope and useless remedies. Seth represents the dark side of the frontier obsession with treasure and wealth, driven mad by greed and isolation. Irish is the tragic figure, a man destroyed by his vices, barely functional, but still stubbornly surviving. John works with all of them, not because he likes them or trusts them, but because he needs them. It's pure pragmatism, the same ruthless practicality that kept him alive in Dutch's gang. When the assault on Fort Mercer finally comes, it's brutal and violent. John, Marshall Johnson, and West Dickens storm the fort with guns blazing. They fight through Bill's gang, clearing room after room. But when they finally breach the inner fort, they discover that Bill has fled. He left for Mexico the night before, probably tipped off by someone in town. The whole operation was for nothing. Bill is gone, and John's only lead suggests he's heading south, across the border into Nuevo Paraíso, where the Mexican army controls territory and American lawmen have no jurisdiction. John will have to follow him into another country, into the middle of a revolution, if he wants to complete his mission. The easy part of his journey, if any part of it could be called easy, is over. Now things are about to get much more complicated and much more dangerous. Crossing into Mexico. The journey into Mexico is one of the most memorable moments in Red Dead Redemption, and for good reason. John crosses the San Luis River with Irish, using a rickety raft, and immediately comes under fire from Mexican army soldiers. They fight back, barely making it to shore alive. As they ride into the Mexican countryside, the game's score swells with Jose Gonzalez's song, Far Away, a hauntingly beautiful piece that perfectly captures the melancholy and beauty of the moment. The lyrics speak of distance and longing, of places we can't return to and people we've lost. It's a moment of quiet reflection in the middle of chaos, a reminder that John's journey isn't just physical, it's emotional, spiritual, a journey into his own past and the consequences of his choices. Nuevo Paraíso is experiencing its own death throes. Mexico in 1911 is in the middle of a revolution. The Mexican Revolution began in 1910 and would continue in various forms until 1920. It was a complex conflict involving multiple factions, all fighting for control of the country's future. In the game, this is simplified into two main forces. The Mexican army, led by Colonel Agustin Allende, represents the corrupt old order, brutal and tyrannical, using violence to maintain power. The rebels, led by Abraham Reyes, represent the forces of change and reform, though they're not necessarily any more moral than those they're fighting against. Nuevo Paraíso is even more lawless and dangerous than New Austin. The territory is divided into three regions: Punta Orgullo in the west, a coastal area with cliffs and beaches; Perdido in the center, characterized by deserts and canyons; and Diez Coronas in the east, mountainous terrain leading back toward the American border. The towns and settlements here are rougher, poorer, more desperate. Chuparosa is a dusty border town, a haven for criminals and those fleeing American justice. Escalera is a small village dominated by a military outpost. El Presidio is the fortress where Allende bases his operations. John quickly realizes he's caught in the middle of a civil war. Both sides want to use him. Allende wants him to hunt down rebels. Reyes wants him to fight against the army. John doesn't care about Mexican politics. He just wants to find Bill and Javier Escuela, another former gang member who's supposedly in Mexico with Bill. But to get what he wants, he has to play both sides, doing missions for people he doesn't trust to get information he needs. In Chuparosa, John meets Landon Ricketts, a legendary gunslinger now in his twilight years. Ricketts is everything John might have become if he'd stayed an outlaw, a living legend, famous and feared, but also alone and aging, his best days behind him. Ricketts takes a liking to John, sees something of his younger self in him. He teaches John advanced gunfighting techniques, helps him improve his already formidable skills. More importantly, he offers perspective. Ricketts, has lived through the transformation John is experiencing. He's watched the West die around him. His advice to John is tinged with regret and hard-won wisdom. He knows that men like them, gunfighters and outlaws, are relics. The world doesn't need them anymore, doesn't want them. The best they can hope for is to survive with some dignity intact, though even that's not guaranteed. John works for both Allende and Reyes, playing them against each other. For Allende, he raids rebel camps and assassinates rebel leaders. For Reyes, he attacks army positions and steals weapons. It's dirty, amoral work, and John hates every moment of it. He's not here to pick sides in a foreign revolution. He just wants to find Bill and Javier and go home to his family. But the work brings results. Through his actions, he gains Allende's trust, or at least convinces Allende that he's useful. Allende reveals that he's been sheltering Bill Williamson, keeping him safe from American authorities in exchange for Bill's expertise in running a criminal organization. Allende promises to help John capture Bill if John continues to serve him. John also encounters the full brutality of the Mexican Revolution. He witnesses atrocities committed by both sides. The army tortures and executes suspected rebels. Rebels burn villages and murder soldiers. Civilians are caught in the middle, suffering regardless of who wins. It's a reminder that violence, no matter what banner it flies under, is still violence. The revolution isn't noble or heroic. It's ugly, bloody, senseless. Men die for ideas they barely understand, while the leaders on both sides are motivated more by power and ambition than any genuine desire to help the people. The situation comes to a head when John helps Abraham Reyes assault Allende's fortress at El Presidio. The attack is massive, chaotic, hundreds of rebels storming the walls while the army defends desperately. In the confusion, John finds Javier Escuella. Their reunion is brief and tense. Javier knows why John is here, knows what John has become. They fight, and John wins. He can choose to kill Javier or capture him alive and turn him over to the authorities. Either way, it's a betrayal of their former friendship, their former brotherhood. Javier, in his final moments of freedom, tells John that it was always Dutch who led them, always Dutch who made the decisions. He implies that John shouldn't blame Bill or any of them for what happened. They were all just following Dutch, just like always. With Javier dealt with, John pursues Bill and Allende, who are fleeing the fortress together. The chase leads through the Mexican countryside, a desperate pursuit. Eventually, they're cornered. But before John can act, Abraham Reyes appears. In a cruel twist, Allende, seeing that he's lost, tries to throw Bill under the metaphorical bus, betraying him to save himself. He pushes Bill out of the carriage they've been riding in, holds him at sword point, offering him up to John. But Reyes wants revenge on Allende more than John wants Bill. Reyes shoots Allende, killing him. John, not wanting to lose his chance, shoots and kills Bill Williamson. Bill's death is almost anticlimactic. After everything John has been through, all the violence and betrayal and suffering, Bill dies quickly, without ceremony. without final words of wisdom or dramatic confrontation. He's just dead, another body in the Mexican dirt. John has completed 2/3 of his mission. Javier is captured or dead. Bill is dead. Only one target remains: Dutch van der Linde himself, the man who started it all, the man who made John into what he is. And Dutch is back in America, in West Elizabeth, which means John can finally go home. Or at least, that's what he tells himself. The return to America and Dutch's last stand. When John returns to American soil, he arrives in Blackwater, the largest and most modern town he's visited on his journey. Blackwater represents everything the frontier is becoming. It has paved streets, electric lights, automobiles, a modern police force. It could be a city back east. The frontier atmosphere that defined New Austin and even parts of Mexico is completely absent here. Blackwater is civilized, orderly, proper. It's the future that's replacing the past John represents. He meets with Edgar Ross and Archer Fordham, the federal agents who've been controlling his life. They inform him that Dutch van der Linde has been spotted in the region. Dutch is leading a new gang, this one composed largely of Native Americans and other outcasts, men and women who've been pushed to the margins by the advancing civilization. Dutch is operating out of the mountains, in the most remote and inaccessible part of West Elizabeth, a region called Tall Trees. West Elizabeth is divided into two main regions: the Great Plains in the east, open grassland that's being rapidly settled and developed, with Blackwater serving as its economic and political center, and Tall Trees in the northwest, a densely forested mountain wilderness that's still largely untouched by civilization. Tall Trees is dangerous territory. It's home to bears, wolves, mountain lions, and Dutch's gang. The terrain is steep, the forest thick, the weather often harsh. It's the perfect place for someone who doesn't want to be found. But before John can go after Dutch, he has to do reconnaissance, gather information, understand what he's up against. He's introduced to Professor Harold McDougall, an academic from Yale who's been studying Native American tribes in the region. McDougall is a perfectly captured stereotype of the educated Easterner coming west to study the natives, full of theories and ideas, but completely lacking practical understanding or respect for the people he's studying. He's condescending, pretentious, and cowardly. John finds him insufferable but useful. He also meets Nastas, a Native American who once rode with Dutch but has since turned against him. Nastas is a tragic figure. He's seen his people's way of life destroyed by American expansion. The reservations are overcrowded and underfunded. Traditional hunting grounds have been taken away. The buffalo have been slaughtered to near extinction. His culture is dying, and he knows it. Dutch recruited men like Nastas by promising them a fight against the forces destroying their world, by offering them dignity and purpose and revenge. But Nastas has come to see that Dutch's fight is hopeless and that Dutch himself is using these desperate men for his own ends, not truly caring about their plight. Through Nastas and McDougall, John learns where Dutch's hideout is located. It's called Cochinay, a remote camp high in the mountains. Getting there requires climbing steep trails, navigating dangerous terrain, and fighting through Dutch's gang. Ross provides John with army support for the final assault. This is it, the culmination of everything. Once Dutch is dealt with, John's debt is paid. He'll be free to return to his family, to his ranch, to the life he's been fighting so hard to protect. The assault on Cochene is massive and brutal. Army soldiers storm the camp from multiple directions. Dutch's gang fights back desperately, knowing they have nowhere left to run. The gunfight is intense, bodies falling on both sides. John fights his way through the chaos, pushing toward where he knows Dutch will be. He climbs higher into the mountains, following Dutch's trail. Finally, he corners Dutch on a cliff edge, high above the valley floor. The two men face each other, once as close as father and son, now enemies. Dutch is older, more weathered, but still possessed of that charismatic intensity that made men follow him. Their conversation is brief, but loaded with history and emotion. Dutch tells John that their kind of men, outlaws, gunfighters, men who lived free outside society's rules, are finished. The West is civilized now. There's no place for them anymore. When John tells Dutch he's done running, Dutch responds with something that will haunt John for the rest of his short life. He says, "We can't always fight change. We can't fight gravity. We can't fight nothing. My whole life, all I ever did was fight." And then, before John can stop him or capture him, Dutch throws himself backward off the cliff. He chooses death on his own terms, rather than capture and humiliation. In his final act, Dutch remains true to his philosophy of freedom, free even in the choice of his death. John watches Dutch fall, watches his former mentor and father figure disappear into the abyss. It's a hollow victory. Dutch is dead, but John feels no satisfaction, no sense of completion, just emptiness and exhaustion. He's done everything the government asked. He's betrayed everyone he once rode with. He's killed his former friends. He's done terrible things for the promise of freedom. Now, finally, it's over. Edgar Ross congratulates him, tells him his family will be released, tells him he's free to go home. John barely responds. He just wants to get back to his ranch, to Abigail and Jack, to try to salvage whatever remains of the life he almost had. The brief piece of Beecher's hope. The game's pacing shifts dramatically after Dutch's death. The frenetic violence and constant movement give way to something quieter, more domestic, more melancholy. John returns to his ranch at Beecher's Hope. Abigail and Jack are there waiting for him, along with Uncle, a former gang member who's been living with the family. The ranch is modest but beautiful, nestled in the plains with mountains visible in the distance. It's everything John has been fighting for: a home, a family, a chance at an honest life. The missions in this section are deliberately mundane. John herds cattle with Uncle. He teaches Jack to hunt, passing on skills that he learned as a young man surviving on his own. He works on ranch maintenance, fixing fences and managing the property. He rides with Abigail, enjoying the landscape and her company. These are not the activities of an action game. They're the activities of a life, a real life, the life John has been desperately trying to achieve. The contrast with everything that came before is stark and intentional. After dozens of hours of violence, betrayal, chaos and death, the game offers peace. It shows what John was fighting for, what he was willing to betray his past and his friends to achieve. And it works. For a little while, it works. John seems almost content. Abigail is relieved to have him home safe. Jack is growing into a young man, intelligent and curious. Uncle provides comic relief with his laziness and his endless excuses for not working. The ranch is thriving. Everything John hoped for is coming true. He's done terrible things, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. Maybe redemption is possible. Maybe a man can change who he is and escape his past. But the game is called Red Dead Redemption, and the word redemption is bitterly ironic, because John's past isn't finished with him. The government isn't finished with him. Edgar Ross isn't the type of man to leave loose ends. John Marston is a loose end, a relic of the past that knows too much, that represents too much. As long as John lives, he's a reminder of the violent frontier days that the new America is trying to forget. He's also a potential security risk. What if he talks about the things he did for the government? What if he becomes a problem later? Ross has never intended to let John live peacefully. The moment Dutch died, John's usefulness ended. And when something stops being useful to men like Edgar Ross, it gets disposed of. One morning, Uncle is out in the fields when he sees something that makes his blood run cold. A large group of armed men on horseback, approaching the ranch from multiple directions. He runs back to warn John. John immediately understands what's happening. He tells Abigail and Jack to get on a horse and ride away, to escape while they can. Abigail protests, not wanting to leave John. But Jack needs her, and she knows John is right. She takes Jack, and they flee out of the back of the ranch, while John prepares to make his last stand. The final gunfight is desperate and hopeless. Wave after wave of federal agents and army soldiers attack the ranch. John and Uncle fight back from the barn, taking cover, returning fire. But there are too many of them, too well armed, too well positioned. Uncle is shot and killed. John fights on alone, knowing he can't win, knowing he's going to die, but determined to give Abigail and Jack as much time as possible to escape. He holds them off for as long as he can, his dead-eye skills allowing him to take down soldier after soldier. But it's not enough. It was never going to be enough. Eventually, John runs out of ammunition. He's trapped in the barn, surrounded. He could hide, try to wait them out, maybe sneak away somehow, but he doesn't. In his final moments, John Marston makes a choice. He throws open the barn doors and walks out into the open, facing down the small army that's come to kill him. For a moment, there's stillness. Then he starts to draw his gun, and the soldiers open fire. John is hit multiple times, his body jerking with the impact of the bullets. He falls to the ground, blood spreading across the dirt, and dies. Edgar Ross holsters his pistol, nods to his men, and walks away. John Marston, former outlaw, husband, father, is dead at 38 years old, killed by the government he served, murdered by men who were never going to honor their agreement. The tragedy is complete. John did everything they asked. He betrayed his principles, his friends, his past. He became a killer for them. and they killed him anyway because that was always the plan. Men like Edgar Ross never intended to let John live. The new America has no place for men like John Marston. They're relics, obstacles, reminders of an embarrassing past. Better to eliminate them and pretend they never existed. John's dream of redemption, of changing who he was and building a new life, was never possible. Some sins can't be forgiven. Some pasts can't be escaped. Change is inevitable, but not always in the direction we hope. The cost of revenge. The game doesn't end with John's death. There's one more chapter to this tragedy. One more generation to fall to the cycle of violence that's defined the Marston family. We jump forward 3 years to 1914. Jack Marston is now a young man, 19 years old. Abigail has died. The specific cause never stated, but implied to be the accumulated stress and grief of her hard life. Jack stands at his mother's grave, next to the grave of his father and uncle. He's the last of the Marstons, the last survivor of a family destroyed by violence and the government's ruthlessness. Jack is different from his father in many ways. He's educated, literate, thoughtful. John and Abigail made sure he had opportunities they never had. He reads books, has interests beyond survival and violence. He could have been something different, something more. But he's also his father's son. He has John's determination, his sense of justice, his capacity for violence when pushed. And he's been pushed as far as a person can be pushed. His father was murdered. His mother died of a broken heart. His family is gone. And the man responsible, Edgar Ross, is still alive, enjoying retirement, unpunished for his crimes. Jack does the only thing that makes sense to him. He sets out to find Edgar Ross and make him pay. It's not about justice, not really. The law will never touch Ross. He was doing his job, maintaining order, eliminating threats to civilized society. From the government's perspective, he's a hero. Jack's quest is about revenge, pure and simple. It's about balancing the scales in the only way left available to him. Blood for blood. He tracks Ross across the frontier, following leads, asking questions, slowly closing in. Eventually, he finds Ross in Mexico, at a river where he's hunting ducks with his brother. Ross is older now, retired, enjoying the peaceful life that John Marston was denied. Jack confronts him. Ross barely remembers John at first, or at least claims not to. When Jack reminds him who John Marston was and what Ross did, Ross shows no remorse. In his mind, he did what was necessary. Outlaws had to be eliminated. That was his job, and he did it well. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't even seem to understand why Jack would want an apology. The conversation is brief. Then Jack challenges Ross to a duel, the old West way of settling disputes. Ross, still a prideful man, accepts. They face each other on the banks of the river. Birds call in the distance. The water flows peacefully. Then, in a flash, both men draw. Jack is faster. He shoots Ross multiple times, killing him. Edgar Ross falls into the shallow water dead. Jack holsters his gun and walks away, leaving Ross's body where it fell. The player might feel satisfaction in this moment. The villain is dead. Justice, however rough and personal, has been served. But the game undermines that satisfaction immediately, because in killing Ross, Jack has become exactly what his father spent the last years of his life trying not to be. He's a killer, an outlaw, a man outside the law. Everything John did, all the compromises and betrayals, all the pain and violence, all of it was to give Jack a better life, to break the cycle, to let Jack be something other than a gunslinger and criminal. And in one act of revenge, Jack has thrown all of that away. He's ensured that the cycle continues for at least one more generation. John Marston's death was meaningless. His sacrifice accomplished nothing. The Marston family remains cursed by violence. Jack will likely spend the rest of his life running from the law, hunted for murdering a federal agent, living the same desperate existence his father tried so hard to escape. The tragedy is complete. The cycle continues. Redemption was always impossible. The themes of Red Dead Redemption. Red Dead Redemption is a game dense with themes and meaning. On the surface, it's a Western, a genre story about cowboys and outlaws. But underneath that surface, it's exploring deep questions about American identity, about progress and its costs, about whether people can truly change, and about the nature of violence in society. Let's explore some of these themes. The death of the Wild West is perhaps the most obvious theme. The game is set at a very specific historical moment, 1911, when the frontier was officially closed. The endless expansion that had defined American identity for a century was over. The continent had been mapped, settled, civilized. The values that sustained the frontier, individualism, self-reliance, freedom from governmental oversight, were being replaced by new values that emphasized community, law, order, and integration into a larger society. The game captures this transition beautifully. We see it in the contrast between towns like Armadillo, still rough and lawless, and Blackwater, modern and civilized. We see it in the presence of automobiles alongside horses, telephones alongside telegraph. We see it in characters like Bonnie McFarlane, representing the old ranching life, struggling to maintain their way of life against economic and cultural pressures. The West isn't dying in some abstract sense. It's being deliberately killed by forces that view it as an obstacle to progress. This leads directly to questions about the cost of progress. The game doesn't romanticize the frontier. It shows us the violence, the casual brutality, the suffering that characterized that time and place. Outlaws like Bill and Dutch are not noble rebels. They're killers and thieves. The frontier towns are full of racism, exploitation, and cruelty. But the game also asks what's lost when we eliminate that roughness and replace it with order. The new America is safer, more prosperous, more just in many ways. But it's also more conformist, more bureaucratic, more willing to use violence to enforce its vision of proper society. Men like John Marston are eliminated not because they're actively harming anyone, not because they can't change or adapt, but because they represent an embarrassing past. The government's treatment of John raises uncomfortable questions. Is this progress? Is this justice? Or is it just a different kind of violence dressed up in the language of law and civilization? The impossibility of redemption is central to the story. The game's title promises redemption, and John desperately wants it. He's trying to redeem himself, to make up for his violent past by building an honest life with his family. He'll do one last series of terrible things, he tells himself, and then he'll be free, clean, redeemed. But the game suggests that redemption doesn't work that way. You can't balance the scales through more violence. John betrays and kills his former friends, men he once called brothers, to save his family. But in doing so, he betrays the very things that made his life worth saving: loyalty, honor, the bonds of chosen family. He becomes an instrument of the government that's destroying the world he came from. His hands get dirtier, not cleaner. And in the end, it doesn't matter anyway, because the government never intended to honor their deal. John's redemption was always a lie. Some deeds can't be undone. Some sins can't be forgiven. You can try to change, try to become a better person, but your past will follow you, and eventually it will destroy you. The cycle of violence is another crucial theme. The game shows how violence reproduces itself across generations. Dutch's violence shaped John, made him into a killer. John tried to break that cycle, to give Jack a different life. But John's death at the hands of the government ensures that Jack becomes a killer too, driven by the need for revenge. The game suggests that violence isn't just individual actions. It's a system, a cycle, a self-perpetuating force that draws people in and won't let them go. Every act of violence creates the conditions for future violence. Ross kills John. Jack kills Ross. Who will come after Jack? The cycle has no end. The game also explores the mythology of the American West and how that mythology functions in American culture. The Western genre has always trafficked in myths: the noble cowboy, the heroic gunslinger, the freedom of the frontier. Red Dead Redemption engages with these myths, but also deconstructs them. John Marston is a cowboy and a gunslinger, but he's not noble or heroic. He's tired, damaged, trapped by his past. The freedom of the frontier is revealed as a myth too. John is never free. He's controlled first by Dutch, then by his own need to survive, and finally by the government. The open landscape of the West is beautiful but also hostile and isolating. The game uses the visual language and tropes of Western films and literature, but it twists them, showing what happens when you look beneath the romantic surface and see the violence, exploitation, and tragedy underneath. Themes of family and loyalty run throughout the story. The Van der Linde gang was a chosen family, and Dutch used the language of family to maintain loyalty and control. John's relationship with his actual family, Abigail and Jack, is what motivates him to betray his gang family. The game asks which loyalty is more important, the family you choose or the family you're born into. John chooses his blood family, but that choice costs him everything he once valued and ultimately doesn't save him anyway. The game suggests that both kinds of family are important. Both kinds of loyalty matter, and being forced to choose between them is a tragedy. Finally, the game explores American identity itself and what it means to be American. The frontier experience was central to how Americans understood themselves for much of the nation's history. The frontier was where you went to remake yourself, to escape the past, to live free. It was the safety valve for society, the place where misfits and outcasts could go. But by 1911, that frontier is closed. So what does it mean to be American now? How does the nation define itself without that frontier mythology? The game doesn't offer clear answers, but it suggests that the transition is painful, violent, and involves abandoning people who don't fit the new vision of what America should be. John Marston is an American who no longer fits America. The land of opportunity offers him no opportunities except death. That's a dark vision, but it's one the game presents powerfully and convincingly. The characters who populate the frontier beyond John himself. Red Dead Redemption is populated with memorable characters who each represent different aspects of frontier life and the transformation happening across the West. Let's spend some time with a few of them. Bonnie McFarlane is one of the most important characters in John's journey. She's strong, capable, independent. She runs her family's ranch, handles the business, and doesn't take any nonsense from the men around her. In another time, another place, she might have been a perfect partner for John. There's definitely an attraction between them, a mutual respect and understanding. But John is married, devoted to Abigail despite his flaws, and Bonnie respects that. She represents the possibility of honest work, of building something rather than destroying. She's proof that good people exist in the West, people trying to make a life without resorting to violence. Her family ranch is one of the last holdouts of the old ranching life, struggling to survive as the economic forces change around them. Bonnie's fate after John leaves is never explicitly stated, but we can infer that people like her are endangered species in the new America being built. Edgar Ross is the primary antagonist, though he never sees himself that way. To Ross, he's a hero, a law enforcer bringing justice to a lawless land. He's helping to civilize the frontier, eliminate the dangerous criminal element, make America safe. He represents the new type of law enforcement that's emerging in this period. Federal agents with broad powers, modern weapons, and the resources of the government behind them. Ross is intelligent, ruthless, and utterly without empathy for the people he uses and destroys. He views John not as a human being, but as a tool, useful for a time, and then disposable. His betrayal of John isn't personal, it's practical. John is a loose end, a potential problem, a relic. Ross eliminates him the same way you'd tear down an old building that's outlived its usefulness. The fact that Ross feels no guilt, sees nothing wrong with his actions, makes him a perfect representation of the institutional violence that's replacing the individual violence of the frontier. Ross is scarier than any outlaw because he has the law on his side. Dutch van der Linde appears only at the end, but he looms over the entire story. He's John's father figure, the man who shaped him into what he is. Dutch was charismatic, intelligent, well-read. He preached a philosophy of freedom and living outside society's constraints. But Dutch was also unstable, prone to violence, increasingly delusional. By the time we meet him, he's a shadow of what he once was, leading a desperate band of outcasts in a hopeless fight against forces too large to defeat. His suicide is the final admission that his way of life is over. He chooses death over compromise, remains true to his philosophy of freedom, even in his final moment. Dutch is a tragic figure, a man whose ideals were perhaps noble, but whose methods were monstrous, who inspired deep loyalty, but ultimately led everyone who followed him to ruin. Bill Williamson is less complex. He's a thug, brutal, and not particularly bright. He followed Dutch because Dutch gave him purpose and structure. Without Dutch, Bill tries to be a leader himself, but he's not smart enough or charismatic enough. He's just a violent man with a gang, terrorizing the countryside because that's all he knows how to do. His death in Mexico is almost pathetic. He's betrayed by his ally, killed by his former friend, dies quickly without dignity. Bill represents the worst of the outlaw life. Violence without purpose or philosophy, just brutality for its own sake. Javier Escuella is more sympathetic. He came to America as a refugee, fleeing violence in Mexico. Dutch gave him a home when he was starving and alone. Javier's loyalty to Dutch was earned through kindness. He's not a monster like Bill. He's just a man who owed a debt and couldn't bring himself to betray the man who saved him, even when that man became a monster. His final words to John suggest regret, understanding that they were all just following Dutch, all caught up in something larger than themselves. Javier is a reminder that not all outlaws are evil. Sometimes they're just desperate people who made bad choices and couldn't find a way out. Landon Ricketts represents what John might have become if he'd stayed an outlaw. Ricketts is a living legend, famous across the frontier for his skill with a gun. But he's also alone, aging, his best days behind him. He survived into an age that no longer needs or wants men like him. He's teaching John not just gun skills, but implicitly warning him about the life of a gunfighter. Fame is hollow. Legend is cold comfort. In the end, you're alone, waiting to die, hoping for some measure of dignity in your final years. Ricketts is kind to John, perhaps seeing in him a younger version of himself, hoping John can avoid the loneliness that awaits all old gunslingers. Abigail Marston doesn't appear often in the game, but her presence is felt throughout. She's John's wife, Jack's mother, the person John is fighting for. Abigail is tough, practical, loving, but not sentimental. She knows who John is, what he's done. She married him anyway, chose to build a life with him, gave him a son. She represents the possibility of redemption through family, through love, through building rather than destroying. When John is killed, Abigail is destroyed. She survives 3 more years, but the implication is that she never recovers from his death, that the grief and stress kill her long before her time. Her fate is another tragedy in a story full of tragedies. Jack Marston is perhaps the most tragic character of all. He's an innocent, a child who did nothing wrong, who should have had a chance at a good life. His parents tried to give him that chance, tried to keep him away from the violence that defined their lives. They taught him to read, encouraged his intelligence and curiosity. Jack loves books and learning. He could have been a teacher, a writer, something respectable and safe. But his father's past catches up with the family, and John is killed in front of Jack's eyes. Then Abigail dies, leaving Jack completely alone. He tries to honor his father's memory, but how does a 19-year-old boy honor a father who was murdered by the government? Jack's transformation from educated young man to killer, his choice to hunt down and murder Edgar Ross, is the final proof that the cycle of violence cannot be broken, that some curses pass through bloodlines regardless of anyone's best intentions. Jack is the most sympathetic character in the entire game, and his fate is the most heartbreaking, the locations that tell their own stories. The world of Red Dead Redemption is more than just a backdrop for John's story. The locations themselves tell stories about the transformation of the West, about progress and decay, about the clash of cultures and economies. Let's explore some of the most significant places John visits. McFarland's ranch in New Austin is a working cattle ranch, one of the last remnants of the old frontier economy. Ranching was central to the Western economy for decades. Cowboys would drive cattle hundreds of miles to railheads where they'd be shipped east to growing cities. But by 1911, the open range is mostly gone, fenced in by homesteaders and farmers. The big cattle drives are history. Ranches like the McFarlands are struggling to survive, squeezed between changing markets and increasing costs. The ranch is beautiful, peaceful, representing the possibility of honest work and simple living. But it's also precarious, hanging on by a thread, one bad year away from failure. The McFarlands embody the people who will be left behind by progress, people trying to maintain a way of life that the modern economy no longer supports. Armadillo is the main town in New Austin, and it perfectly captures the awkward transition the frontier is undergoing. It has elements of civilization, a sheriff's office, a general store, a doctor, but it's also rough and violent. Gunfights break out regularly. Outlaws pass through freely. The law is more suggestion than rule. Marshal Lee Johnson does his best to maintain order, but he's understaffed, underfunded, and dealing with problems that exceed his resources. Armadillo represents the frontier trying to become civilized, but not quite succeeding, caught between two worlds. It's not wild enough to be exciting, not safe enough to be comfortable, just a dusty town in the middle of nowhere, slowly dying as people move to bigger cities or more fertile land. Fort Mercer is an abandoned military installation that Bill Williamson has converted into a fortress. It's a perfect symbol of the changing West. The fort was built to protect settlers from Indian attacks and to establish government control over the territory. But that function is no longer needed. The Native Americans have been defeated and confined to reservations. The army has moved on to other concerns. So the fort sits empty until outlaws move in and use the government's own fortification against them. Bill's occupation of Fort Mercer is deeply ironic. He's using the tools of the old order to resist the new order, but it won't work. The assault on the fort is swift and decisive. Bill's gang is scattered, and Bill himself flees. You can't fight progress by hiding in a fort. Blackwater is the most modern location in the game. It has everything: paved streets, electric lights, modern buildings, a police force, automobiles. If you didn't know you were on the frontier, you might think you were in a city back east. Blackwater is the future that's coming to the entire West. Civilization and modernity spreading from the coasts inward, transforming everything in its path. But Blackwater is also deeply threatening. Its modernity makes it alien, cold, unwelcoming. The old frontier values of independence and self-reliance have no place here. You conform or you're eliminated. Blackwater is where John meets Edgar Ross and receives his final assignment. It's fitting that the most modern town is where John's fate is sealed, where the forces of progress and government decide he must die. Chuparosa in Mexico is a border town, a place where people from both sides of the Rio Grande mix and mingle. It's rougher than any town on the American side, poorer, more desperate. The Mexican Revolution has made life hard for everyone. Soldiers and rebels pass through constantly, each side demanding loyalty or at least neutrality. Both sides willing to use violence to get what they want. Chuparosa represents the international dimension of the frontier experience. The American West didn't exist in isolation. It bordered Mexico, and that border was porous, contested, dangerous. Outlaws fled south to escape American law. Mexican citizens fled north to escape the revolution. The border was a space of opportunity and danger, freedom and violence. Chuparosa captures all of that, a town where anything can happen, and probably will. Cochinay is Dutch's final hideout, high in the mountains of West Elizabeth. It's remote, difficult to access, defendable. It's also isolated, cut off from the world, a dead end. Dutch chose Cochinay because it represents his philosophy taken to its logical extreme. He's removed himself as far as possible from civilized society, taken his followers with him to this mountain fortress where they can pretend for a little while that the outside world doesn't exist. But the outside world always comes eventually. The army storms Cochinay with overwhelming force. Dutch's hideout, his last redoubt, is overrun in hours. You can't hide from progress. You can only delay the inevitable. Beecher's Hope, John's ranch, is the most important location in the game, even though we see it primarily at the end. It's modest but beautiful, nestled in the Great Plains with a view of the distant mountains. John built it with his own hands, with help from friends and family. It represents everything he's been fighting for: a home, a future, a chance at peace. The ranch is where John is finally allowed to be himself, not an outlaw, not a killer, not a tool of the government, just a man working his land, raising his family, living an honest life. The ranch is also where John dies, gunned down by the government he served. His blood soaks into the soil of the land he worked so hard to make his own. Beecher's Hope is both a dream realized and a dream destroyed. Proof that John's hopes were possible, but also that they were doomed from the start. The ranch will outlive John, but it will never be what he hoped it could be, the gameplay that serves the story. Red Dead Redemption's gameplay is deliberately designed to reinforce its themes and narrative. Every mechanical system in the game contributes to the overall experience, making players feel what John feels, understand what he's going through. The honor system is central to this. Throughout the game, John can make choices that affect his honor rating, helping strangers, capturing outlaws alive rather than killing them, defending innocent people from attackers. These actions increase honor. Committing crimes, murdering innocent people, robbing stores, these decrease honor. The system reflects John's internal struggle between his outlaw past and his desire to be a better man. Players can choose what kind of John they want to play: a man trying to redeem himself, or a man who's given up and embraced his violent nature. The honor system affects how NPCs react to John and which ending variations the player sees. But more importantly, it makes players think about their choices, about what kind of person John is becoming through their actions. The Deadeye system is the game's signature mechanic. When activated, time slows down dramatically, allowing John to target multiple enemies and take them out in rapid succession. It's a powerful ability that makes John an incredibly dangerous gunfighter, but it's also thematically significant. Deadeye represents John's skills, honed over years of violent life. He's so experienced with violence, so practiced at killing, that he can enter this altered state where everything slows down and every shot finds its mark. It's a superpower, but it's a superpower born from trauma and endless combat. Deadeye makes players feel powerful, but it's also a reminder that John is a killer, that this is what he's good at, that these skills define him whether he wants them to or not. The fact that Deadeye is necessary to survive many encounters reinforces that John can't escape violence. He needs these skills. They're what keep him alive, but they're also what make it impossible for him to truly leave his past behind. The open world design serves the narrative beautifully. Players can explore freely, ride for hours without encountering a mission or structured content. The landscape is vast, beautiful, and often lonely. This isn't accidental. The game wants players to feel the isolation of frontier life, to understand what it means to ride for days with only your horse for company. The random encounters that populate the world, ambushes by bandits, strangers asking for help, wildlife attacks, reinforce the dangerous nature of the frontier. But there's also beauty in the emptiness. The sunsets are stunning. The wildlife is diverse and realistic. Thunderstorms roll across the plains with awesome power. The world feels alive, not just as a game space, but as a place. Players spend so much time in this world that they develop a relationship with it, grow to appreciate its harsh beauty. This makes the transformation happening across the frontier more personally meaningful. You're watching a place you've come to love change into something else. The side activities and optional content reinforce the themes too. Players can hunt animals, not just for challenge, but to sell pelts and meat, participating in the frontier economy. They can play poker or blackjack in saloons, experiencing the social life of frontier towns. They can take on bounty hunting missions, capturing criminals for money, essentially doing legally what John did illegally for years. They They can help strangers with various problems, small stories that illuminate the lives of ordinary people in the West. All of these activities make the world feel real and lived in, but they also make players think about what it means to live in this time and place, how people survived, what they valued, how they spent their time. The game never forces players to engage with this content, but by making it available and rewarding, it encourages players to slow down, to live in the world rather than just rushing through the main story. The pacing of the campaign is deliberately structured to build emotional investment and then subvert expectations. The game starts with action. John arriving in New Austin and immediately getting shot, setting up his quest. Then it builds slowly through the New Austin section, introducing characters and mechanics, letting players get comfortable with John and the world. The Mexico section raises the stakes, throwing John into the middle of a revolution, ramping up the violence and chaos. The West Elizabeth section brings everything to a climax with the hunt for Dutch. Then, after all that build-up, the game shifts completely. The epilogue at Beecher's Hope is quiet, domestic, peaceful. It's jarring after so much action, and that's the point. The game wants players to feel the contrast, to understand what John is trying to achieve, to believe that maybe, finally, he's found peace. And then it rips that away with the final confrontation, devastating the player the same way John's death devastates his family. It's brilliant narrative design, using the medium's unique properties to create an emotional journey that wouldn't be possible in any other art form. The legacy of Red Dead Redemption. Red Dead Redemption was released in May of 2010 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It was an immediate critical and commercial success. Critics praised its story, its characters, its world, its technical achievement. Players embraced it as one of the defining games of that console generation. It won numerous Game of the Year awards and is consistently ranked among the best games ever made. The game sold over 23 million copies, making it one of the best-selling games of all time. But beyond the commercial success, Red Dead Redemption had a profound impact on video game storytelling. It proved that games could tell mature, complex stories with the same depth and emotional resonance as the best films and literature. It showed that open-world games didn't have to be mindless sandboxes, but could have strong narratives that made all the freedom and exploration meaningful. It demonstrated that players would embrace a tragic story with no happy ending, that they could handle complexity and ambiguity and themes that don't resolve neatly. The game also revitalized the Western genre. Westerns had been declining in popularity for decades. By 2010, they were considered a dead genre, nostalgic artifacts with no relevance to modern audiences. Red Dead Redemption proved that wrong. It showed that the Western setting, when handled with intelligence and depth, could be just as compelling as any contemporary setting. The game sparked renewed interest in Westerns across media. Western films, books, and television shows experienced a small renaissance in the years following the game's release, a direct result of Red Dead Redemption, demonstrating the genre's continued potential. The success of Red Dead Redemption led directly to Red Dead Redemption 2, released in 2018. The prequel, set in 1899, and following Arthur Morgan and the Van der Linde gang, expanded on everything the first game established. It provided the backstory that was only hinted at in the first game, showing exactly how Dutch's gang fell apart, how John ended up in the position where the first game finds him. Red Dead Redemption 2 was even more successful, breaking sales records and winning even more awards. Together, the two games form one of the most significant narrative achievements in gaming history, a sprawling story about the death of the American frontier told across two games, two protagonists, and 15 years of in-game time. The themes Red Dead Redemption explored have only become more relevant in the years since its release. Questions about the cost of progress, about institutional violence, about whether people can truly change, about the cycles of violence that trap individuals and societies. These are questions that resonate strongly in our current moment. The game's skepticism about simple answers and happy endings feels prescient. Its refusal to let John achieve the redemption he desperately wants speaks to a deeper truth about life, that sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite doing everything we're told to do, things don't work out. Sometimes the past catches up with you. Sometimes the powerful crush the powerless, regardless of who's morally right. Sometimes there are no happy endings, just endings. The game's portrayal of government agents as the real villains, more dangerous than any outlaw because they have the law on their side, has aged remarkably well. Edgar Ross, with his ruthless efficiency and complete lack of empathy, represents a type of institutional evil that's perhaps more frightening than individual villainy. He's not crazy or sadistic. He's just doing his job, following orders, serving what he believes to be the greater good. The fact that his job involves betraying and murdering people who've served the government doesn't trouble him at all. He sleeps well at night. That's more terrifying than any outlaw could ever be, the meaning of Red Dead Redemption. So what is Red Dead Redemption really about? On one level, it's about the death of the American frontier, the transformation of the West, from wild territory to civilized states, and the people crushed by that transformation. On another level, it's about the impossibility of escaping your past, about how the person you were continues to define you no matter how much you change. It's about the cycle of violence and how violence reproduces itself across generations, destroying families and communities. It's about the lies we tell ourselves to justify our actions, the belief that if we just do this one last terrible thing, everything will be okay. It's about the bitter irony of the word redemption when applied to a man who can never truly be redeemed, who will die without saving his soul, whose sacrifice will prove meaningless. But perhaps most fundamentally, Red Dead Redemption is about time and its relentless passage. Time destroys everything. It transforms landscapes, cultures, people. The West that John knew as a young man is gone by the time the game takes place, replaced by something different, something he barely recognizes. The gang he rode with is scattered, dead, or betrayed. The values he learned from Dutch freedom, loyalty, living outside society's rules are now considered criminal and must be eliminated. John himself is changing, trying to become a different person, but time won't allow him the peace to complete that transformation. Time is running out for John, for the West, for a whole way of life, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. The game's final image is of Jack Marston walking away from Edgar Ross's body. Jack has become a killer, just like his father. The cycle continues. Time marches on. But the game leaves Jack's ultimate fate ambiguous. We don't know if he'll be caught and punished for murdering a federal agent. We don't know if he'll build a life for himself or die young and violent like his father. We don't know if he'll ever escape the curse that seems to hang over the Marston family. The ambiguity is deliberate. Red Dead Redemption doesn't offer easy answers or tidy resolutions. It presents a tragedy and lets players sit with the discomfort, the sadness, the sense of waste and loss. In the end, Red Dead Redemption is about the American dream and its failures. John Marston believes in that dream. He believes that a man can reinvent himself, that the past doesn't have to determine the future, that hard work and good intentions are enough to build a better life. He's wrong. The game systematically dismantles that belief, showing that some people are marked by their past in ways they can never overcome, that society will never truly accept certain people, no matter how much they change, that the powerful will always exploit and then discard the powerless. The American dream is a lie, or at least it's a lie for people like John Marston. The frontier promised opportunity and freedom, but it delivered violence and death. The new America promises law and order, but it delivers the same violence and death, just dressed up in respectable clothes and justified by legal language. And yet, despite all this darkness, despite the tragedy and hopelessness that pervades the story, there's something beautiful about John's journey. He tries. He fights for his family. He attempts to become a better man, even knowing the odds are against him. He faces his death with courage, giving his family a chance to escape even as he's cut down. There's dignity in that, even if there's no redemption. John Marston is a flawed man, a killer, a criminal, but he's also a father, a husband, a man trying to do right by the people he loves. His failure doesn't erase the nobility of the attempt. His death doesn't mean his life was meaningless. He mattered to the people who loved him. He tried to protect them. That's something, even if it's not redemption. Red Dead Redemption is a game about loss, about watching everything you know disappear, about the painful transformation that accompanies progress. It's about the West dying, about outlaws becoming obsolete, about families being destroyed by forces beyond their control. It's a tragedy in the classical sense, a story about good people destroyed by circumstances and their own flaws. But it's also a story about resilience, about continuing to fight even when you know you've already lost, about maintaining your humanity in the face of dehumanizing forces. It's about John Marston, a man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone with his family, who was denied even that simple dream, who died trying to protect the people he loved. His story is sad and beautiful and unforgettable, and that's why 15 years after its release, we're still talking about it, still thinking about it, still moved by it. Closing thoughts. We've spent the last hour exploring the world of Red Dead Redemption, walking alongside John Marston on his tragic journey through the dying days of the American frontier. We've ridden through the deserts of New Austin, crossed into revolutionary Mexico, climbed into the mountains of West Elizabeth. We've met memorable characters, witnessed the transformation of a nation, experienced the brutal reality of frontier justice. We've explored themes of redemption and revenge, progress and its costs, violence and its cycles. And we've watched John Marston try desperately to escape his past, only to be destroyed by the very forces he tried to serve. Red Dead Redemption is more than just a game about cowboys and shootouts. It's a meditation on American history and identity, on the myths we tell ourselves about our past, on the costs of progress and civilization. It's a tragedy about a man caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, trying to protect his family and build a better life, but ultimately crushed by forces too large and too ruthless for any individual to resist. It's a story about time's relentless passage, about how everything changes whether we want it to or not, about watching your entire world disappear around you. The game doesn't offer comfort or easy answers. It presents a harsh truth that sometimes good people suffer, sometimes hard work isn't enough, sometimes the past can't be escaped, sometimes redemption is impossible. But it presents that truth with such artistry, such emotional depth, such genuine understanding of human nature, that the experience becomes meaningful despite, or perhaps because of, its darkness. We watch John fail, watch him die, watch his son fall into the same cycle of violence, and we're moved by it, changed by it, made to think about these themes long after the game ends. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Red Dead Redemption, please consider liking and subscribing to Law 2 Dream. There are so many more stories to explore, so many more worlds to visit, so many more questions to ask about the games and myths and legends that capture our imagination. Red Dead Redemption showed us that video games can tell stories as powerful and meaningful as any other medium. It proved that interactive narrative can move us, challenge us, make us think and feel in ways we didn't expect. That's worth celebrating. That's worth exploring further. Until next time, ride safe out there in whatever frontier you're exploring. Remember that change is inevitable, but not always for the better. Remember that the past shapes us, but doesn't have to define us completely. Remember that even in the face of hopelessness and tragedy, the attempt to be better, to protect the people we love, to live with dignity and purpose, that attempt matters. John Marston failed to achieve redemption, but he never stopped trying. That's heroic in its own way. That's something worth remembering. Sleep well, and may your dreams take you to wide open spaces where the sun sets slowly over distant mountains, where horses gallop across endless plains, where the frontier still exists, if only in memory and story. Good night.